What really happened with your host, Mike Rivero. You're listening to the Republic Broadcasting Network, where you'll find out what the Fukushima's going on.
And aloha, America. Welcome to our show today. It's Tuesday, July 25th, 2017, getting into the week here. A lot of stuff going on, a lot of stuff to talk about. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. Mike is in our control room, twiddling the dials, keeping us out of trouble, ready to answer the phone when you call on in. Now, obviously, the big news right now is the Senate is back to dealing with the health care bill. And there are a lot of concerns about it. John McCain did make it back onto the floor of the Senate. He gave a speech, clearly reading from the podium. He said one thing I agreed with, which is that the GOP is being perceived behind the partisanship that has deadlocked the Congress for so long. And he said that does need to come to an end. Then he launched into this thing about how America stands for democracy and human rights, and how all these wars around the world, we don't covet all these other lands' wealth and power. And at that point, I had to turn it off. But apparently, the Senate has voted to go to the floor debate. They haven't passed the measure yet, but they basically said it is time to go to a floor debate. Apparently, there was actually a tie vote. Mike Pence actually got to do his job as vice president and cast the tie-breaking vote. So they're moving forward on that one right now. We'll talk a little bit more about the health care bill when we get into the economic section here. Now, we're trying to sort out what's going on between Donald Trump and Attorney General Jeff Sessions. And apparently the corporate media is already out there saying Trump is very disappointed in Jeff Sessions, and they're still trying to go on back to this idea about Sessions recusing himself from the Russia investigation. But the real issue appears to be quite different. Yesterday we talked about how Trump had tweeted out to Sessions that he should be investigating Hillary's Russia ties. Well, apparently it wasn't so much a directive as a rebuke. And Trump is getting very angry that Attorney General Jeff Sessions seems absolutely determined not to look at the very obvious crimes that Hillary Clinton committed. There's the Russia-Trump collusion. There was the new scandal that the writer over at the Wall Street Journal was getting ready to write on about Hillary helping an American company bypass the Russian sanctions to buy a Russian company. That's a new one that's just coming on out. There's the Uranium One deal. And Sessions has clearly not been doing his job on that. So all of a sudden we're hearing talk that Sessions may be fired and replaced with Rudy Giuliani, who wouldn't be any more inclined to go after Hillary Clinton than anybody else. And there's a big problem that Donald Trump is facing when he tries to drain the swamp. Everywhere he turns, it's more swamp. He can't find anybody inside the Washington power structure who is not corrupted by that narcocracy. And that's where he is so hamstrung. So Trump is very unhappy that Sessions is not, in fact, investigating Hillary Clinton. Now, remember, when James Comey, former head of the FBI, had his little bizarre press conference where he said, we're not recommending charges, which, by the way, was not his job, he went down the laundry list of Title 18 felony violations committed by Hillary Clinton and then said, we're not going to prosecute, she didn't mean wrong. Forgetting that Title 18 does not require intent. Negligence, recklessness, and carelessness are still violations that carry jail terms. So Comey is out. Loretta Lynch is out. Sessions is in, and he's done nothing about this, and I can understand why Trump is very angry. Of course, the corporate media, if Trump fires Sessions, if he fires Mueller, they're going to be screaming, oh, it's Nixon all over again and the firing of Archibald Cox. And it does look like the entire deep state, the narcocracy, is just openly at war, not just with the President of the United States of America, but with the people's choice for who will rule them. And that's the real war, the narcocracy against the rest of us. Sean Hannity is out there saying that America faces a crisis because the anti-Trump forces are starting to build up towards a coup. You've got the alt-left, destroy Trump propaganda media that continues to lie to the American people about this Trump-Russia collusion theory, and there's no evidence, a lot of fake, a lot of fraud. And somebody has to fake the evidence. That's a confession right there. There's nothing to the case. Because if you have real evidence, you don't dare fake any evidence, because if the fake evidence is exposed, it can discredit all the evidence. So the mere existence of fake evidence, in this case that dossier about Trump and the prostitutes in Moscow, tells us there never was a case. Then you have the deep state, the narcocracy, the entrenched liberal bureaucrats, and the Obama holdovers who are selectively leaking information to harm the president and anybody associated with him any single way they can. Then you have Robert Mueller, good friend and supporter of the liberal Democrats and Hillary Clinton, who has allowed mission creep to settle over his investigation of the Trump-Russian collusion, and he's found absolutely nothing. So now it's turned into an out-of-control political witch hunt that's just going anywhere it wants to. We're going to do a quick shout-out now to our on-air affiliates who are rejoining our network. We're talking about this growing deep state coup d'etat against the President of the United States of America. And you have all this manufactured turmoil that is putting President Trump's agenda in jeopardy. That affects all of us. If we don't get the tax relief, that's affecting us. If we don't get Obamacare repealed, that affects us. If Obamacare gets repealed with something that's even worse, that affects us. And what we're seeing here is an all-out effort to overcome the will of the American people and change the results of a presidential election. That's a threat to the nation itself. Now, former CIA Director John Brennan is openly calling for a coup d'etat if Trump fires Robert Mueller, and saying that if Trump issues that order, the White House staff has an obligation to refuse to carry that out. No, they don't. All of those officials serve at the pleasure of the president, and he can fire anybody he wants at any time he wants, for any reason he wants, or for no reason at all. You understand that coming into the White House, that you can be let go if you're not doing the job Trump wants you to do. Now, a group of former U.S. intelligence officers, including NSA specialists, citing those recent forensic studies on the leaked DNC emails, have sent an open letter to Donald Trump saying this proves it was an internal leak, it was not a hack by Russia. And you will never hear that on the corporate media, because they're still out there, Russia, Trump, Russia, Trump, Russia, Trump, because they don't have anything else to work with. They don't have anything else to work with to go after the President of the United States of America. And the reality is, as Oliver Stone came on out on the Letterman show and was then deleted by CBS, Israel is tinkering with our politics far more than Russia. They can't find any significant Russian influence in our elections. But look at AIPAC, handing out money to candidates left and right, going over to the media and saying, you'll support this candidate, you'll go against that candidate. And there's nothing new here. All the way back 55 years ago, Senate Foreign Relations Committee Chairman J.W. Fulbright was convinced that all of these unregistered Israeli foreign agents were a serious, serious matter. And to this very day, AIPAC still does not have to register as a foreign lobby group. They get special treatment, special exception. Now, the Democrats are thinking about next year, and the numbers are not looking good. The donations are not looking good. They ended last month $3 million in the red. So they're gearing up for next year. So what are they going to do to try and retake the Congress? Well, they're going to come up with a new slogan. We have a new slogan. And the slogan is a better deal, better skills, better jobs, better wages. It is awkward. It is too long. It smacks too much of Roosevelt. It's a bad slogan. I mean, from my own work in advertising, I know it's really not going to work. People are going to be forgetting bits of it. And apparently they spent a huge amount of time and money poll testing this, focus grouping it. It was an embarrassment when they rolled it out yesterday. WikiLeaks has released another 8,000 emails that once again shows the collusion between CNN and the Washington Compost and the Democratic Party to throw the election to Hillary Clinton. The corporate media are not on the side of the American people. The corporate media are on the side of the rich and powerful, and especially the side of the narcocracy. Now, there's been a little bit of an upset over at Newsweek. This is really, sub rosa, very quiet. But Kurt Eichenwald, apparently following this libel suit with a former Sputnik writer, has sort of lost his link to Newsweek. He didn't actually work for them, but he listed on his website that he was affiliated with Newsweek. And Newsweek has pulled 2 of his articles from their website, and over at Eichenwald's Twitter account bio, it no longer says he's affiliated with Newsweek. So they're starting to have some more troubles over there. Not as bad as Megyn Kelly, poor Megyn Kelly, and poor NBC. Boy, did they make a bad bet on this one. She couldn't even get 3 million viewers this week. She got 2.71 million viewers on her show Sunday Night with Megyn Kelly. That's down from 3.1 million viewers the previous week. She's being beat out by reruns of old TV shows. Nobody likes a liar. And the corporate media has got to reach a point where they realize that all the star power and all the bodacious babes and all the glitzy sets and all the technology are not going to bring the audience back if the audience knows they are still being lied to. If the corporate media continues on the way that it is continuing, the outcome is inevitable. And even Breitbart was saying the same thing. They're going to destroy themselves. A year from now, CNN will be gone. New York Times will be gone. Washington Post will be gone. And the independent media will be the new high ground in the war for the minds of America. So let's turn over to the war zones. Apparently, the Syrian army has liberated 55 towns and killed 2,000 terrorists just since last month. They're making huge gains. And apparently they're securing victories in the northwest of Palmyra. And again, the writing is on the wall. This war is all but over, which is why we're already hearing the U.S. government try and gin up excuses to remain in Syria, even after the terrorists are gone. And I might point out again that the United States does not have the permission of the government of Syria to be there at all. And you need to keep that in mind. Tulsi Gabbard, she's still out there, and I'm really liking this lady. I hope the Democrats are smart enough to run her for the White House. But Tulsi Gabbard is out there saying that the United States government has become addicted to regime change, and reminding everybody once again that the CIA funded and armed Al-Qaeda in Syria, and we now have a confirmation because Donald Trump has now apparently ended that program. And it was all started under President Obama and Secretary of State Hillary Rodham Clinton, and technically it amounts to an act of treason, which is legally defined as aid and comfort to the enemy in time of war. And at the time, we were all being told that there's a war on terror, and we are making war on the terrorists, ISIS and Al-Qaeda, and then we find out our own government is sending weapons and supplies to ISIS and Al-Qaeda in Syria. That qualifies as treason. We can add that to the laundry list of reasons why Hillary Clinton ought to be in jail. Forget about the White House. She should be in the big house. Over by the border with Lebanon, they're in the 5th day of the offensive at Arsil, and one of the jihadi groups, Al-Tali, is on the run. And apparently they've seized the last ground from Jabhat Fatah al-Sham's control. So that's going very well over there as well. Hezbollah says their ongoing battle with the Nusra Front is almost won at that Syria-Lebanon border. And they're now urging the rest of the insurgents in the area to give on up and accept the amnesty program. And a lot of people apparently are. They're sick and tired of fighting. With the U.S. government constantly changing the reason why they're in Syria, most of these people don't even know what they're doing, why they're there. Am I after Assad? What am I supposed to be doing here? And now they're fighting amongst themselves ever since al-Baghdadi's death. Now, turning over to Iran, they're starting to talk tough again. Iran apparently is now back on the top of the special high-interest targets list. And the White House is saying that they're prepared to impose new and serious consequences on Iran unless all unjustly imprisoned American citizens are released and returned. They then went on to say the United States condemns hostage takers and nations that continue to take hostages and detain our citizens without just cause or due process. Notice the attempt to link the current situation with the 1979 Iranian hostage crisis. Now, in point of fact, these imprisoned American citizens were not just grabbed off the street. They have been arrested for espionage, and they are awaiting trial. But any excuse to throw more sanctions on Iran to try and provoke them a little bit longer. Now, remember the other day when somebody claimed to have found a Palestinian rocket in Israel, and they actually had a photo of the debris, which doesn't even look like it's a rocket. There's no signs of combustion on it. Frankly, it looks like somebody renovated their bathroom, and this is some of the leftover shower pipe. And it was just a foot long. That's it. And I said, oh boy, we're going to see Israel uncork on Gaza, and boy, do I hate being right all the time, because Israel has carried out airstrikes in southern Gaza, supposedly at a Hamas position, and apparently no injuries reported. But they blew up a lot of buildings and real estate here. Meanwhile, the United Nations once again has warned that this escalation of the situation at Al-Aqsa, say that 3 times fast, could lead to catastrophic outcome, because the entire Muslim Middle East is now standing up in anger and saying Israel can't do this. This is the third holiest site to Islam. And if you don't understand why they feel angry about it, like I said the other day, imagine that you're a Catholic or whatever religion you are, and you decide you're going to go to the church on Sunday, and you arrive and it's been fenced off. And Israel's saying, we're now in charge of this ground, and nobody under the age of 50 is allowed in. And everybody over the age of 50 has to have a pat down and a crotch grope and a scan. How would you feel about that? Well, that's what the Palestinians and the Muslims are going through right now. And the UN is saying this has to be resolved. Now, again, the American corporate media is saying this is all about metal detectors. No, it isn't. It's all about Israel's arbitrary declaration that nobody under the age of 50 be allowed in. And again, under the UN Security Council resolutions saying who's in charge of what part of Jerusalem, Israel doesn't have any legal authority to be there. They are there by virtue of having really big guns. And it's about to get more intense, despite the cautionary note from the United Nations, despite the comments coming in from other nations in the Middle East. Israel is sending thousands more IDF soldiers to the West Bank because of the Temple Mount tensions. They're provoking some kind of an uprising. Over in Turkey, Erdogan is saying that the Israeli boots are desecrating Al-Aqsa. Now, if you know anything about Islam, you know that one of the traditions they have there is that you do not wear shoes inside the mosque. And obviously the Israelis aren't going along with that. I remember when there was we're coming up on a commercial break, and when I come on back, we're going to do a flashback story. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. We're talking about the escalating situation at the Al-Aqsa Mosque, and the idea that this is less about security than more about Israel truly seeking to become a Jewish-only state. And to put that in context, you need to understand that the government of Israel has been incredibly intolerant of every other religion They don't even approve of the form of Judaism here in the United States. And we've seen editorials by members of the Israeli government telling American Jews, we're grateful for your money and your support, but don't presume to tell us how to run the country, because this is an Orthodox Jewish country and you've got something else over there. There was many years ago, there was a situation where some refugees took sanctuary in one of the Christian churches in Jerusalem, and the IDF soldiers standing around it they were literally photographed urinating on the side of the church here. Back in 2010, the U.S. State Department issued a report on religious freedom in Israel and found out that Israel was openly discriminating against Christian priests, making them reapply for visas over and over again, limiting the number of visas, taking months to grant a visa. Apparently Israel refuses to legally recognize several churches, including pretty much all the Protestant ones, and it just goes on and on and on. It's religious discrimination. But that has not stopped the U.S. Congress from continuing to support Israel, the finest Congress money can buy. Our government is a Vichy government. They're ruling this land on behalf of a foreign invader. And the other day we were talking about how Congress is looking at a bill that will literally make it a crime for which you can go to prison to support the boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement. Now there are 43 senators who want to make it a federal crime to boycott any of the products coming from the Israeli settlements. And, I mean, it's ridiculous. This idea that if you choose not to buy products from the Israeli settlements, that you can be punished for it. Well, there's a little gray area in there. I won't buy batteries made in the Israeli settlements. It's got nothing to do with the Israeli settlements. They're lousy batteries. Years ago, we had a home alarm system, and the batteries were supposed to last 6 months, and they kept failing. Usually in the middle of the night, which was very, frustrating. And the thing would go off, battery dead, and wake us up. We finally got rid of the entire alarm system. They're poor quality batteries. I refuse to buy those batteries, not because they're from the settlements, but because they're lousy quality batteries. And if these 43 senators are so concerned with Israel and selling the products from the illegal settlements, we need to crate these 43 people up, make sure we drill air holes in the wood slats there, and ship them there. Because I am getting sick and tired of a government that seems far more concerned with Israel than it is with the American people. The government can't feed the hungry and homeless in this country, but boy, there's always money for Israel, isn't there? Always money for Israel. Now let's talk about the Russian sanctions deal. As you know, there's been a lot of pushback on this. Most people realize it's just another form of provocation. And again, most people understand it's based on a falsehood. Russia interfered with our elections. And I can't even believe that Trump is going along with this, because he has to know that there was no collusion. But apparently he's getting a lot of pressure from the GOP, who are literally saying they will not support his reelection in 2020 unless he goes along with this nonsense. So Trump is out there saying he's going to review the Russian sanctions bill to ensure Americans get the best deal. Well, Mr. President, I'll tell you right now, our best deal is unrestricted trade with Russia. That's our best deal. Ron Paul is out there saying that Trump needs to veto this foolishness because it is based on a falsehood. It's based on a lie. And it's causing more harm than good. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. Now, we're talking about Donald Trump is looking at the sanctions deal. He says he wants to get the best deal for the American people. Well, the best deal for the American people is unrestricted trade around the world. We can sell to them, they can sell to us. And it is going to be impossible to revive manufacturing and the U.S. economy in this country at the same time you're sanctioning all of our potential customers and suppliers. It just does not make any sense whatsoever. And to nobody's surprise, of course, the European Union is absolutely in a fury over this possibility of more sanctions against Russia by the United States. Because every time the United States throws another sanction onto Russia, it harms the European Union. Prior to all of this nonsense of trying to turn Russia into our new enemy and start a whole new Cold War, Europe did a very good business with Russia. Russia bought a lot of European agricultural produce, and now that's been cut off. And the Europeans are looking at this and saying, more of these sanctions are going to do exactly the same thing. They're going to cause us more economic harm. They're causing more harm to Europe than they are actually to Russia. So they're very, very upset over all of this. Justin Raimondo is out there basically saying that this whole sanctions bill is just an ode to hypocrisy, groupthink, smugness, and cronyism. This idea that they can coerce the rest of the world to do what the United States wants them to do by sanctioning everybody. We're cutting ourselves, and for that matter, Europe, off from the rest of the world economically. For all this talk about free trade, we're seeing more and more restrictions on trade, whether it's these so-called free trade deals or all these sanctions. We're in serious economic trouble in this country. It's not going to be solved with another war. It's going to be solved by dropping all this nonsense about sanctions and restrictions on trade and saying, okay, let's get down to business. What do we have that you want to buy? What do you have that we need to buy? And just go for it. Peace through commerce. Unfortunately, politicians want to feel they're in control of everything that's going on. And that's really what it's all about. Control of everything that is going on. And the only way they can do that is everything has to go through the government. Everything has to be regulated so that they can feel that they're in charge, even though they're doing a complete, total botch-up. Now, the new Pentagon budget, $700 billion, will partly fund a U.S. presence in Eastern Europe and more weapons for Ukraine. And the United States government is sending more arms to Kiev, but they're out there saying, this is not a provocation. No. This is not a provocation. We're sending defensive weapons only to counter Russian aggression. Unfortunately, these weapons are not being used defensively because over in the Donbass, a homeowner found a U.S.-made anti-tank missile in his garden. There had been no tanks anywhere around there. The Ukrainian army is shooting these U.S.-made weapons at houses. It's just utterly ridiculous. China and Russia stage war games on EU border, taunting West with WW3 threats. A little bit of propaganda coming out of the Express in Great Britain. And I want to read you a line from the article. Russia and China are putting the world on edge as they conduct joint operations with their most advanced warships on Europe's doorstep. Now, notice how when NATO conducts war games all along the Russian border, it is to counter Russian aggression. But when Russia and China conduct exercises to defend themselves, it puts the world on edge. There's a very clear and obvious bias there. Our war-making is good. Their war-making is bad. Now, that's the American point of view. In Europe, it's a little bit different. We have an article out of Xinhua Net, where apparently the Chinese naval fleet sailed into a port in Greece at Piraeus. And it's a friendly visit. They were greeted by the mayor and the townspeople and an orchestra. Doesn't sound like they're putting the world on edge over there. Frankly, everybody was having a good time. And here's the latest Bex alert going on out there. Russia might be arming the Taliban in Afghanistan, according to CNN. They might be. CNN's not even going to take that Russia is arming the Taliban. They might be. because we have seen some of the Taliban carrying Kalashnikovs. Now, what's interesting in the videos and photos, there are no markings on the guns. There's no insignia, there's no labels. And the Kalashnikov is licensed for manufacture around the world. And there is nothing that gets from this point of the CNN video back to Moscow. Moscow doesn't want to go back into Afghanistan. They learned a bad lesson there the last time. In fact, they're just sitting back and laughing at the United States for walking into the same bear trap. But it's all about, ooh, those bad Russians, those bad Russians. We're failing in Afghanistan. It's the fault of the Russians. They're doing bad things. From now on, I make a prediction. From now on, anything that goes wrong, it's Russia's fault. We're stuck in Afghanistan. Oh, it's those Russians. Got hit with ransomware. Oh, it had to be Russian. My car battery died. Oh, it was the Russians. They were trying to hotwire your car last night. That's the new guideline for the corporate media. Anything bad that happens, it's Russia's fault. And if it isn't Russia's fault, it's Trump's fault. Now, tensions in the South China Sea are starting to ramp up. Apparently, Vietnam had granted permission for an oil drilling operation by a Spanish company, Repsol. And apparently they did it inside the territory claimed by China in the South China Sea. See, note that name, South China Sea. Inside the area given back to China at the end of World War II by the Cairo Convention. And China basically said, if you want, we'll just go ahead and destroy the rig. And Hanoi backed down. And they yanked the permit for the drilling operation. So it's getting very, very serious down there. This is where we need to take a look at that magic word, disputed. Because what's really going on here is we have political leaders who aren't happy with the world the way it is. They don't like where the borders are going. They don't like where the boundaries are drawn. They covet resources that are just on the other side of that line. So they get on a map and they draw a line around those coveted natural resources and they declare the area to be disputed, which is political speech for, we're going to come in and steal this. Which is why I had such a problem with McCain's speech this morning. That's what disputed means. We're coming to take it away from you. Apparently there's been an incident over in the Persian Gulf. The U.S. Navy opened fire on an Iranian patrol boat that was 150 yards away, and the U.S. is claiming...
Russia's trying to...
Whoops. Got something going on there. Anyway, the USS Thunderbolt, a Cyclone-class patrol boat, was involved in this. The Iranian naval vessel came within 150 yards, at which point the Thunderbolt opened fire, claiming that the Iranian vessel did not respond to radio calls, flares, or warning sirens. For that matter, neither did the crew of the USS Fitzgerald. And now that that accident was their fault, I have to admire the courage of the Iranians coming even that close to a U.S. warship. Because those U.S. warships have a bad habit of ramming and sinking other people's ships. Now here's another piece of Beck's alert. This is coming out of Fox News. Iran will soon have ICBMs armed with nuclear weapons by way of North Korea, and Team Trump must act now. And so this article's going on there saying that North Korea is going to send ICBMs and nuclear weapons to Iran, who will then turn around and start attacking targets all over the Middle East, Europe, and the United States of America. It's on Fox News. It must be true. And then the article goes on to say, we must attack North Korea now. We have to attack North Korea right now. Well, if you really feel that way about it, here's your rifle, here's your parachute. Watch your head climbing into the transport, and we'll call North Korea and Iran and tell them you are on your way to kick their butts all by yourselves. But we're going to sit this one out. Because we, the people, remember all the times the corporate media has lied us into wars. We remember how Saddam didn't really have nuclear weapons. We remember how Iran wasn't actually building nuclear weapons. We remember that Iran has not initiated a war of conquest in over 200 years, while the United States can't seem to go for 6 months without bombing, invading, drone striking, or regime changing other nations that have done nothing to deserve such treatment. We remember there were no torpedoes in the Gulf of Tonkin. There was no Spanish mine in Havana Harbor. We remember that the Lusitania was, in fact, smuggling weapons to Great Britain in violation of the United States' claim of neutrality, thus making her a legitimate target of war. We remember how Roosevelt goaded the Japanese into the attack on Pearl Harbor. And we also remember, for all the talk about Iraq's nuclear weapons and Iran's nuclear weapons and North Korea's nuclear weapons and Disneyland's nuclear weapons, that in all of human history, one and only one nation has actually used nuclear weapons of mass destruction against the civilians of another country. And the nation that committed that atrocity is the United States of America. By the way, I think I mentioned this over the weekend. Smithsonian Channel was just nonstop war glorification, and they did have a documentary about the dropping of the bomb on Hiroshima, because we're coming up on that anniversary next month, about how it was the right thing to do, and we needed to do it, and we were good to do it. And no, Truman dropped the bomb on Japan to prove to the rest of the world we had it, and were psychotic enough to use it. Japan was already trying to surrender when Hiroshima was bombed. There wasn't going to be an invasion of Japan costing millions of lives. It was another big fat lie that you were told to get you to go along with this idea of simply incinerating 2 cities of civilians. Now, getting on back to Iran, clearly there is a program of destabilization underway. Iranian border guards have seized a large cargo of weapons and ammunition being smuggled into the country using livestock. Remember how the CIA was smuggling weapons into Afghanistan? They were using pack mules. So they found these 30 horses and mules carrying weapons, ammunition, explosive devices discovered in the northwestern parts of the country by the border guards. And so somebody is trying to get an insurrection going over there. Meanwhile, Iran's security service seems to be doing a good job, certainly better than the United States FBI, because over 120 terrorist attacks have been thwarted across Iran in recent years. Yes, they had one the other day, but it was one out of many, many attempts. Meanwhile, down in Iraq, Putin is going to meet their vice president as Iraq seeks substantial Russian military and political presence in the country. In other words, Iraq is kicking out the United States. Iraq is seeing how things have gone in Syria when Russia was invited in there. And Iraq knows full well what happens when the United States comes into your country, because they got to see it up close and personal. And you would think, with all of these recent disasters, these foreign policy whoopsies, that the United States would understand that old model of covert regime change isn't working any longer, because countries understand that's what's going on, and the citizens of those countries are fighting back. They did it in Libya. They're doing it in Yemen. They don't want to live under foreign puppet rule. Nobody does. No sane individual who loves their country is going to sit there and say, oh, yes, I'm perfectly happy with the government that is running my country for the benefit of some foreign rulers. Anybody who says they're happy with that, lock them up right now. Take away their belt and shoelaces. Don't let them operate heavy machinery. They're a danger to themselves and everybody around them. Meanwhile, despite hope that the upcoming BRICS meeting might calm things down between China and India, China is out there making some very belligerent statements saying they will protect their border with India at all costs. And to back it up, they are now sending tons of military equipment into this area of border dispute. There's that word again. Now, I've looked at that part of the world through Google Earth, through the CIA World Book. There doesn't seem to be much of anything there at all. So the obvious question becomes, why is India provoking China on this one point? And more to the point, who put them up to it? Because I don't think India got this into their head all by themselves. to get into a big stink fight with China over a relatively unimportant piece of real estate. Now, getting on over to North Korea, the propaganda is pouring on out there. Story coming out of Sputnik News. U.S. ramps up surveillance as North Korean sub continues unusual activities. So the United States is out there saying that this North Korean sub is continuing an unusual activity. It's in the Sea of Japan, which, by the way, is international waters. So they're keeping an eye on this. It's a Romeo-class diesel-electric submarine, and it's been engaged in activities for about a week. And they're saying that's a little bit longer than normal for the North Korean submarines. Okay, little bit of a history lesson. The Romeo-class submarines were built back in the 1950s. They are considered obsolete. They're used as training ships. They're not effective combat platforms. They certainly do not carry missiles. It's a training mission. Now, our relations with the Philippines continue to decline, and apparently Philippine President Duterte has, in his annual State of the Nation address, has demanded the United States return some church bells that were seized by American forces more than a century ago. And basically, American forces stole 3 bells from the Catholic Church of Balangigi town on the eastern island of Samar. And they want the bells back, heritage. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. And the other day, we got onto the topic of military spending, how it's just a cash cow for those who are on the inside, these executives who work for companies like Halliburton, and then they get themselves into positions of authority and give their companies a lot of business, and then they leave. And certainly Dick Cheney did that. We know that Michael Chertoff, when he was Director of Homeland Security, he's the one who started all this nonsense about the airport scanners and swabbing your luggage and the rubber gloves on the TSA. And then when he left public life, he started a company, the Chertoff Group. What do they do for money? They sell scanners, they sell swabs, they sell rubber gloves. It's just absolutely corrupting. And the net result has been an incredible burden on the American people. And so people started sending in these articles. This is from Global Research. Trillions of dollars in U.S. military spending is unaccounted for. This is all taxpayer money. And we're talking huge amounts of money. There's at least a $6 trillion shortfall. That comes out to $64,000 per American family. When I was a kid, $64,000 would buy you a really nice home. Looking at America today, $6 trillion, what you could do with that, you could update our nation's infrastructure, bring it up to code. That's been budgeted at just $1.5 trillion for the entire nation. New roads, new rail, new pipes, new wires, everything. New dams. And the money's just gone. Just gone. Now, getting on back to Halliburton, there was another article. This was over at Blacklisted News, where Congress wagged its finger a little bit at Halliburton. But apparently, there was $1.4 billion in billings that weren't supported. The company was charging $45 for cases of soda pop, $100 to clean 15-pound bags of laundry, $1,700 per gallon of fuel for the military vehicles. It was just absolutely a cash giveaway to these corporations and their owners, all at your expense. And we look around and we see all these corporate CEOs who were part of this. They're living in huge mansions. Maxine Waters apparently living in a $4 million mansion. And we have homeless Americans, hungry Americans. The roads are falling apart. The infrastructure doesn't work. There's a certain amount of political parasitism a nation can survive with a healthy economy. When you don't have a working economy and the parasites continue to grow, You start looking very ill as a host, and that's where we are. Looking at America today, it is a host that is being sucked dry by the parasites who live off of it. And the biggest parasite of all is the war machine. Even if they track the money, what is it being spent on? It's not being spent on something that we can resell or make more money with. It basically blows itself up. We could just throw the money in the fireplace. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show, hour number 2. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. And let's talk about the economic news a little bit. There's been a little bit of a development which is probably going to upset a lot of people up in Brussels. Some years ago, there was a story where Germany, just in case, was starting to print Deutschmarks. They're putting them in warehouses just to have available just in case. And according to this article that came out from Investment Watch blog, they've started doing it again. Germany is now printing national internal Deutschmark notes to have ready to put into circulation should the euro fail or should Germany decide they're going to do a hard exit. But at this point, it looks like the European Union is being torn apart. It's being torn apart by the predations of the European Central Bank. It's being torn apart by the refugee crisis. And it's being torn apart by the absolute arrogance and intractability of the EU leaders up in Brussels. Meanwhile, the Bank of England has issued what they consider a dire warning over the skyrocketing household debt of the British citizens. Mortgage prices going up, credit card debt skyrocketing, car finance deals. Even the Bank of England understands there can be too much debt. If the people are not able to pay it back, there's too much debt. And the expectations are that the Brexit is going to result in an economic slowdown in Great Britain while they forge new trade deals. And that means that, like the American people, British citizens who incurred a certain level of debt on a fairly decent salary are now going to be stuck in lower paying jobs trying to service that same debt. We're seeing that all across the United States. Now, we've been talking about Retail-mageddon, and I have to tell you, Claire and I, just looking around here, we're seeing all these retail vacancies, just whole strip malls shut down. In fact, there was one at the bottom of the hill here. They just went in and bulldozed the place, and now it's just being used as a parking lot. And everybody's wondering, how are they going to stop this? Well, apparently the holders of the properties, the shopping malls, the storefronts and everything, they're trying a strategy of lowering the rent for the retail space as much as they can to see if they can slow the retail collapse a little bit. And it may help, but it's only going to be a delaying tactic. Because at bottom, the reason retail is in trouble, and yes, they love to blame it on online sales, but the real problem is the American people don't have enough disposable income to support the previous consumer economy. They just don't. Most Americans are just paying their household bills and they've got nothing left over to go to the shopping mall with. That's the reality. And for most people, buying things online is a fallback. It's a second choice. Because the essence of retail is instant gratification. I go into a store. Ooh, look at that. I want it. Here's my money. I get my object. I go home. Everybody happy. Now, for the most part, my online shopping experience has been positive, but there have been a few disappointments. I want to actually, especially in these days of planned obsolescence, I want to hold the product in my hand and judge for myself how well it is made. And that's a reason why I only buy things online if I have no other choice, which unfortunately here in Hawaii is more and more the case as companies go out of business. Article coming on out from Blacklisted News. Banks are scheming to dominate a future cashless society. And again, their motivation is not customer service, but total control of the money. to prevent a run on the bank. When the banks get into trouble, they're just going to use your money to save themselves. You're not going to be able to knock on the door and say, give me my savings account. They're going to say, there's no way I can hand it to you. There's no more portable stores of value that we can give to you that represent your savings account. You have to leave it in the bank, or you can move it to another bank, but they'll just send it back to us. And as you know, Visa is out there actually incentivizing businesses who are using their credit card system, debit card system. They're literally paying them to refuse cash. Now, call me a Luddite, call me old-fashioned, but any business that won't take cash, I'm not going to do business with them. That's just it. I refuse. I'm standing firm on this. Now, the question has come up, is it actually legal for businesses to refuse cash? And it turns out to be a convoluted area. Now, Massachusetts actually has a law that says all retail establishments must accept payments in cash. Unfortunately, it's not really being enforced because the bankers don't want it enforced. But there are two categories of transaction at the federal government level. We're going to do a quick shout out to our on-air affiliates rejoining our network. We're talking about the question of is it legal for companies to refuse payment in cash? And it turns out that there are two different cases. Now, if the transaction is considered instantaneous, in other words, I go up and I buy a new coffee press and they want payment, they can refuse cash and say it must be a debit or a credit card. However, if the payment is to settle a debt, you have taken a taxi ride, you have had a meal in a restaurant, and then they bring you the check, then it is illegal to refuse legal tender. So in those restaurants that are accepting this Visa inducement to refuse cash to pay your lunch check, it's actually illegal. But it's a very gray area, and unfortunately we live in an age where the government isn't enforcing laws that inconvenience the corporations. Let's talk about health care, especially because we have all the votes. They're making a big deal over the fact that the Senate voted to start the debate. It's a big nothing. They're supposed to do that anyway. But see, we're making progress. We've agreed to talk about it. It's weird. The 70 top-paid U.S. health industry CEOs have raked in a grand total of $9.8 billion with a B since Obamacare passed. You know these guys, the ones who are all out there saying that the American healthcare industry will go broke if Obamacare is repealed. And topping the list of these CEOs is John Martin, who was in charge of Gilead Sciences to the tune of $863 million since Obamacare's passage. This one CEO alone has made almost $1 billion. So the Affordable Care Act, just like the Health Maintenance Act, was not about the health of the American people. It's about sucking more money out of the pockets of the American people for corporate executives. Rand Paul has come on out saying that the current debate in the Senate is in a very fuzzy area because as of right now, there are two different versions of the bill. And nobody knows what they're voting on yet or even which one is being debated. And he's out there saying that he agrees that we should just repeal Obamacare. And he's very upset that once again we're getting this idea that we're going to have to vote this legislation through to see what's in it. Remember when Nancy Pelosi, when the first Obamacare came on out, we had to vote it through to see what's in it? That's a very ruinous way to run a government. And look at the disaster that resulted. If you like your plan, you can keep your plan. Wrong again. It's all about money. It's all about taking people who are chronically ill or injured and exploiting their fears for the maximum possible profitability. Okay, apparently over in Europe, the violence is continuing to escalate among migrants who are still trying to get into Great Britain before the Brexit actually happens. And apparently along the road to Calais and the Channel Tunnel, migrants stopped a truck and they literally clubbed the trucker unconscious with a brick and just left him by the side of the road. They stole his vehicle, loaded it up with more migrants, and tried to get through onto the train to Great Britain. Fortunately, they were stopped. But it is getting to be very dangerous over there in Europe. Europe is rapidly becoming something other than Europe. And apparently, over in Germany, the tensions are heating up there. Angela Merkel is still with this idea that all refugee migration into Germany should be unrestricted, even though it created a crisis in 2015, 2 years ago. And a German member of the European Parliament is saying that there has to be a cap on it so it can be managed, so that they can take in refugees and not wreck the German economy and infrastructure in the process. Now, behind it all, of course, you have George Soros and all of his NGOs, and this article in Russia Insider is talking about all these countries like Poland and Hungary who are starting to strain at the leash and reassert their national sovereignty. And more of these Central European member states are saying their enemy is not Brussels, it's George Soros. And they want to take out his vast network of agents and NGOs because he's just turning Europe into something other than Europe. Now, up in Sweden, interesting little development. Apparently, there were some politicians out there talking about open borders and this is the new reality and just get used to us. And apparently, somebody in the audience stood up and said, if something happens to my daughters, I will find and kill the perpetrator. Then I'm coming for you politicians next. And apparently, the audience cheered. So, Representative Gutierrez is out there with a very alarming statement. Apparently he was speaking at a church, Lincoln United Methodist Church on Saturday, and came on out and literally said Trump is the major criminal for blocking refugee open borders. And he went on to say he will eliminate him as president when the Democrats win a majority in the House, which sounds like they're talking about impeachment. They want to impeach President Trump for enforcing the Title VIII immigration laws in this country. Now, I've studied that Constitution, and that's not what impeachment is supposed to be used for. You don't impeach a president for actually obeying and enforcing the laws. Gutierrez said that Trump is attempting to criminalize migrants and immigrants, but the president is the real criminal. Well, there is a small problem there, as I've said before. Migration is a filtering process. We're not getting the best of the source country. And by the way, Representative, the instant somebody steps across that border into the United States of America without permission to be here, they are in fact a criminal. And I'm going to get all these emails saying, oh, you're being racist. No, I'm not. Illegal is not a race. Now, interestingly enough, over in Great Britain, one of the Tory MPs is explaining why he went from being a Remainer to a Brexiteer. Apparently, the arrogance of EU boss Jean-Claude Juncker following the referendum result just turned him off. Remember, Juncker was out there. How dare you vote to leave us? Nobody leaves the Galactic Empire. Flipped him on over. But we're seeing Europe start to evolve away from its close relationship with the United States, in part because the United States supports that open border policy. And there's an interesting article over at Gatestone Institute where right now, forget about Russia, forget about China, forget about North Korea, the worst ideological enemy of the United States is now Europe. And we know that the EU wants to unite all of Europe as a single country. They want to have their own army. They want to project power. They want to become a world power. And that's something that is definitely not in line with the U.S. designs for the New World Order. Okay, we actually finally have a caller. John in Massachusetts, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind? John, are you there? John, I cannot hear you. Okay, I don't know what's going on. Well, I'm going to go back to the news and maybe we'll fix whatever our connection with John is. Apparently, U.S. District Court Judge William Orrick, who last April blocked implementation of Trump's travel ban, is basically refusing to lift his block, even though he has received documents from Attorney General Sessions saying that cities that willfully refuse to comply with the federal law will lose their federal grants. We literally have judges, governors, mayors who are in open rebellion against the President of the United States of America. And what's really weird is that they're not fighting for their independence or liberty. They're fighting to bring down the borders of the country, to serve the New World Order, to make us all slaves of a one-world government. Now, as you know, we've got a big problem with police brutality in this country. There's no question about it. That tragedy in Minneapolis, I think, is a good illustration. Between prescription antidepressants and this training by these Israeli security companies, which train the American police to treat the U.S. citizen the way the IDF treats the Palestinians. And if you don't know what I mean by that, take a look at the videos coming out of the Al-Aqsa Mosque and the Temple Mount compound right now. That's what they're being trained to do. The motto of the police used to be to protect and to serve. Now it's, we treat you like a king, as in Rodney King. We're just going to club you over the head. Apparently, Great Britain is going to make the same mistake. Britain is starting to send their police to be trained in Israel. So, Britain is now going to have a problem with police brutality. I remember a time when the British police were considered the best in the world. They didn't even need to carry guns. Now it's all becoming militarized. Now, up in Seattle, and Claire and I used to live in Washington State briefly before we came to Hawaii. They've got a little bit of a scandal going on there. Their mayor, Ed Murray, who's gay, he's married to another man, and he's politically backed by the Gay and Lesbian Victory Fund, apparently has been accused of abusing his foster son, according to a child welfare investigator. And apparently at least 4 men have now come forward to accuse Murray of rape. And this was all when they were underage. And apparently he has already backed out of his re-election campaign. He backed out in May. This week, a lot of Seattle's other candidates and representatives are saying he should just step down. Because the longer he stays in office, the worse it's going to get. Not just for Murray, but for the image of Seattle's state government. Now, the other day we were talking about this body cam video on a police officer. Little bit of an embarrassment. This officer went down an alley and planted drugs next to this house they wanted to raid and arrest the guy inside. Then he walked back out, turned on his body camera, and just wandered down the alley pretending to be looking, found the drugs and said, aha, here we go. One problem, he didn't realize that the body camera actually saves the 30 seconds from before it is turned on. And it basically documented the fact that he had planted the drugs to justify an arrest. Well, it gets a little bit better than that, because apparently the state attorney in Baltimore is now having to review 100 cases of arrests by this officer where he may have been planting evidence as well. So it really does get insane out there. I guess, framing people, setting up patsies, a lot easier than actually going out and finding real crime. Right, guys? We'll be right back. And And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. Of course, we're in the summer months here, and of course, summer when it's warm is when they like to push the human-caused global warming agenda, and Al Gore's Inconvenient sequel is out there, and the critics are raving, and the box office isn't all that good. And so once again, the scientists are out there screaming, it's the end of the world unless you give us more funding. Give us your money and obedience, and we'll save you from the dragons. Article coming out of the Independent Great Britain. Climate change scientists very worried the Greenland ice sheet might start to melt faster and faster. And only a tiny amount is needed to melt to threaten millions in coastal communities around the world, blah, 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 blah. 18 years ago, one of the co-founders of Greenpeace predicted that 20 years from now, or 20 years from then, Greenland would be ice-free. And, of course, there's actually more ice on Greenland today than there was back when he made the announcement. And the guy actually admitted later on in TV, well, it wasn't going to be real, but we got to scare people into going along with our agenda because we mean well. Even when we're lying to them and we're rigging the computer data and we're fudging everything, it's for a noble cause to save the earth from you icky-poo human beings here. And there's so much fraud, nobody really has an idea what's going on. In fact, a lot of the scientists who are going along with the global warming don't realize they themselves are being fooled. Because there have been studies of the official temperature information put out by NASA and NOAA and Hadley. And a study has shown that all of the warming in those data sets is added in. It's not in that raw data. So there are a lot of scientists who are not meaning to be part of the scam who don't understand they're being lied to by their fellow scientists. And of course, the climate scientists are in a panic because there's a real debate now. And people are fact-checking them. We're not willing to take their word about what's going on. And we never should have. Science is always about questioning, about re-examining. Scientists make mistakes. Some of them are real doozies. And when science becomes politicized, when it's used as a replacement for religion to just get the masses to go along with the agenda because the scientists said so, you're in a dangerous area there. In the good old days, the king would go over to the head of the church. There'd be a man standing there with these robes and holding a holy document. He would say, this is what you believe. And today, because religion is on the wane, they're using science for the same thing. We've got a guy in a white laboratory coat, and he's holding a clipboard. You have to believe what he says. No, we don't, and you shouldn't. Individual scientists are just as corruptible as individual politicians, individual lawyers, individual clergy. Looking at the long-term data, we can see that we are, in fact, in a cooling trend. Right now, today's temperatures in Toronto are far below what they were 150 years ago. See, one of the things the global warming people like to do, they like to frame the data. They cherry pick that view into the temperature graph that says, oh, we've got warming going from here. That's what we'll show them. Oh, see, it's warming. And you don't see before that where it was actually warmer and then getting cooler and then getting warmer and then getting cooler. It's a sales pitch. It isn't science. Anytime you have a scientist saying, trust me, put your hand on your wallet right then and there. Now let's get on to the world of computers and computing. And I'm playing with my Raspberry Pi again. And even though it's considerably more complicated than Linux as I remember it from my days in computer animation, it's still fun. It reminds me of when computers were fun, like the Commodore Amiga and machines like that. Today's machines, you're almost spending so much time keeping them running, you can't have fun with them. You can't even get any meaningful work done with them. We'll be right back after these commercials. And And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. So we're talking about computers, and I wanted to just sort of back off and do a general observation because I've spent most of my life around computers. I built my first computer-ish thing in high school physics out of old telephone relays. Played a decent game of tic-tac-toe as long as you always let it go first, and it always took the center square. And it made a heck of a lot of noise while doing it. But it was a lot of fun. And early on, computers were fun. They were simple, easy to understand. You could see what was going on in them. I remember on my Commodore VIC-20, one of the cool things to do was just set up a loop that would dump the memory to the screen and just watch it scroll on by, and you'd see the contents of the memory, and you'd see all the registers in the CPU going, and it was quite a lot of fun. But as computers have become more corporatized, and more importantly, ever since computer software and hardware companies have been indemnified from product liability and don't think you should have a right to know what's going on inside your computer that you own, they've become more work. They're not fun anymore. We spend so much time patching and protecting and malware installation, software, all of that stuff, security and all the rest of it. We can't have fun with them anymore. And we can't even get decent amounts of work out of them. And again, we're seeing a very short-sighted approach to business development by the computer companies, which has resulted in long-term harm. And I'm sure these CEOs are getting ready to retire with all their huge amounts of money, like Bill Gates did. And he's gone off about the world, causing all kinds of trouble, and he doesn't care what happens to the state-of-the-art of computing anymore. But we really should, because we have to live with it. Certainly the biggest problem right now continues to be the out-of-control epidemic of hacking and cybercrime, about which our government seems totally unconcerned. Unless, of course, it's one of their computers, then it's a big deal. Apparently, there was a major cyber against a company called Wreck-It, and it cost the company an estimated 100 million pounds. It crippled the company in just 45 minutes and wiped out whole sections of its global network. And apparently they were a victim of the Petya ransomware. And it took just 45 minutes to hit 15,000 laptops, 2,000 servers, and 500 computer systems, rendering them unusable. And they still have not fully recovered. Now, from where I sit, that is a clear and present danger to the economy of the nation, as well as a clear and present danger to the IT infrastructure on which we've all become dependent. Now, back when computers were fun, and we had acoustic modems, they were things to be played with. We didn't rely on them to run our businesses. We didn't rely on them for primary forms of communication. Now we are. It's an indispensable part of our society's infrastructure, and it's under constant attack. I remember when the Mac first started coming on out, and they loved to advertise that they were immune from all the Windows malware. Well, technically, yes, two completely different computers. Malware that operated on Windows wouldn't infect a Macintosh. And the Mac users got kind of smug and self-satisfied. I have the better machine. I am not, affected by the malware. Well, the reason was purely economic. In the early days, Apple's Macintosh was a tiny portion of the market. It had been captured early on by the Windows-based machines. That's the target-rich environment, and that's where the hackers went. As Macs have become more prevalent, sure enough, malware that targets the Macintosh has been forthcoming. And I almost feel sorry for some of these naive Macintosh users who are not the battle-hardened veterans of cyber warfare that we Windows users have become. So apparently there is a new little nasty out on Mac computers. It is nearly undetectable, and it can remotely take control of your webcams, your screen, your mouse, keyboards, and install additional malicious software. And it's been infecting hundreds of Mac computers for more than 5 years, and it was detected just a few months back. 5 years this thing's been out there. Now, it's called fruit fly, obvious reference to Apple, and it was detected earlier this year by Malwarebytes researcher Thomas Reed. Apple's released security patches to address the dangerous malware. Now, here we have Patrick Wardle, an ex-NSA hacker and chief security researcher at SINAC, discovered around 400 Mac computers infected with a newer strain called Fruit Fly 2 in the wild. And apparently there's concern that Fruit Fly 2 is likely to infect many more machines. It's more aggressive. What's the FBI doing? Nothing. The official FBI recommendation, if you are infected by ransomware, is to pay the ransom. Kind of makes you wonder whose side the FBI is on here, doesn't it? Remember, Kaspersky identified the Hacker Collective Equation Group as actually being part of the NSA. Maybe all this ransomware is just another way for the government to plunder and loot the American people. Sort of the internet version of civil forfeiture. A desperate, pathetic attempt to grab cash by a government that is deeply in debt, hopelessly broke. But they got to fund the wars, got to send more money to Israel. So we'll rob and plunder our own people to balance the books. Okay. All right. I'm having a conversation with our tech room. Apparently there is an issue with the telephone system. That's why we're not getting any calls today. So I'm going to drag these last few stories on my talking points out an awful lot here. Out in California, very hip, very futuristic, the California schools are starting to install smart door locks connected to Wi-Fi. And apparently the whole idea is to monitor when the doors are open and closed. And I imagine that probably if the keys are being identified to track who is going into the classroom when. Now, the first thing that occurs to me is that some smart kid is going to figure out a way to go over the Wi-Fi and unlock a classroom without having the key at all. It's amazing how these things get deployed without thinking them all the way through. In the good old days, you use a couple of paper clips to get into the classroom. Now, do you know what the Roomba is? It is a robot vacuum cleaner that, and by the way, if you've got a lot of rugs and cables, don't get one. But if you've got smooth floors, these things are wonderful. And basically, it's got a charging dock, and it will basically take care of itself. It goes vacuums out the floor that it's on. And you can program it to do specific rooms, operate at specific times. Cats love to ride around on top of these things. Really kind of nice to take care of your home. There's only one problem. Apparently, Roomba builds up a map of your home. It will map out the internal layout of your home. And now Colin Angie, who's CEO of Roomba, actually of iRobot that makes the Roomba, now wants to sell that data from those maps, supposedly to improve the future of smart home technology. But what it means is the internal layout of your house, including where the furniture is now going to be available online. By the way, we don't have a Roomba here. Now, here's a good one. As you know, the self-driving car is the coming thing, and everybody's rushing to get on board the technology. Tesla's way out ahead. But so far, all of these self-driving cars are operating autonomously. They're looking at the road, they're looking at the signs, they're looking at the other cars, and they're driving for you. Stanford researchers are now working on a system of centralized control over self-driving cars to network them together, possibly to, on the upside, avoid traffic jams, on the downside, to basically keep track of where you're going, And I can almost see this situation where somebody gets into their self-driving cars and says, I want to go down to the Waffle House, and the car says, no, I'm not taking you to the Waffle House. You're going to the gym for a workout. Too many waffles there. And it might be the end of the black and white patrol car. Because if you're a wanted criminal, you get in the car doors all lock, and your car drives you to the cop station. Now, there's a company called 3 Square Market, sometimes known as 32M. It's a marketing solution provider, which is a fancy word for coming up with new ways to sell things to people. And what they're doing right now is trying to sell an idea to their own employees to accept being microchipped. 3 Square Market has partnered with Swedish biohacking firm Biohacks International. They're going to implant microchips to all their employees starting the 1st of next month. Now, the program is optional. It's not mandatory, but the company is hoping to get at least 50 of its employees to undergo this procedure as kind of a pilot test. And basically, the chip will go into that little fleshy bit of skin between your thumb and the forefinger, and it will allow for the employees, obviously, to be tracked around as they log into their office computers. They're going to pay for food and drink from office vending machines, open the doors, use the copy machine, various other purposes. I definitely would not want to be part of that, because you never know where the data is going to wind up. And as it turns out, there is a good reason. Now, again, I'm glad that this guy was caught out doing what he was doing, but it does reveal that you need to be aware of what electronic devices you have and what they're storing on you. So apparently over in Butler County, Ohio, there was this gentleman named Ross Compton. He's 59 years old. And his house burned down, $400,000 in damages, and he filed an insurance claim. Now, according to reports, Compton told the authorities he was asleep when the fire started. When he woke up, he grabbed a few things, threw them in a suitcase, threw it out the window, and was off, and that was kind of the end of it. But the insurance company wasn't convinced, and they took him to court for insurance fraud and arson. And he was basically convicted because, as it turns out, Ross Compton has a pacemaker. And this pacemaker, like all the modern ones, keeps track of your biomedical data. And they had a cardiologist come on in and look at the readout from the time of the fire and realize that he'd been showing activity much longer and earlier than the fire broke out. And on that basis, they convicted the guy. Now, in this case, yeah, the guy shouldn't be allowed to get away with insurance fraud and arson. But it is a reminder that as we become almost decadent in our application of computer technology across our entire civilization, that there is a risk there. I actually saw this movie on the cable box yesterday, and I didn't see it from the beginning. But the storyline was about this guy who was breaking into smartphones of fellow students at this high school and basically getting naked pictures of them and putting them out on the net. And the story was about how traumatized these kids were, how they were getting unwanted attention from members of the opposite gender. And again, that's a real situation. At least in the days when you had the Polaroid camera in the bedroom, you didn't have to worry about somebody making a copy of that and sneaking it out over a wire. But kids do need to be educated about these risks. And kids are going to play. Kids are going to do what kids are going to do. I think it's time that we start coming down hard on these abusers of the internet because they're causing a lot of harm. But our government seems strangely unconcerned. All right, let's talk about net neutrality because that is still being hotly debated. It's not net neutrality. It's anti-net neutrality or net anti-neutrality. These are regulations designed to take away the balanced internet and create special for-fee high-speed lanes. Now, a lot of people are not actually getting the bandwidth they pay for. We have that problem here in Hawaii. Ever since Spectrum took on over the place, it's been horrific. And I'm reluctant to say, well, I'm only getting X amount of megabits per second. Can I sign up for the plan for X amount? Because I'm sure what I'll really get will be lower than that. The state of New York actually sued Spectrum for false advertising by promising 100 megabit per second into the home, and nobody got it. They failed to deliver. It's just advertising. So what the internet service providers want to do is they want to take bandwidth away from ordinary people like you, small website operators like myself, independent media, and they want to use it to boost the bandwidth being used by the large corporations who can pay a special fee. Now, this violates a principle that was established back when the Bell Telephone Company was broken up as a monopoly and turned into the regional phone companies, and it was called common carrier. And that was that all the regional phone companies were required to carry phone traffic that originated and possibly terminated outside their immediate area. Everybody carried everybody's traffic, and it worked out very well. And in the early days of the internet, the same thing applied. Everybody's internet traffic was given an equal priority, and that worked out very well. But as the corporate media outlets continue their struggle to maintain control over the minds of America, what they want is to grab the lion's share of the bandwidth and basically shove independent media over into a corner where we're going to be operating back in the days of 300 baud acoustically coupled modems to get the word out about what's going on. So it's these large corporations. Once again, the large corporations get what they want because that's how fascism works. Government authority and corporate interest aligned against the general population. We'll be right back. America, welcome back to our show here, and we're just now getting word the House of Representatives has overwhelmingly passed a new round of sanctions on Russia, along with Iran and North Korea. And the bill also included a provision saying that President Trump cannot unilaterally lift the sanctions. He'll have to go back to Congress, and Congress will have to lift the sanctions. And I don't know if they realize it, but they just gave Donald Trump the perfect excuse to veto this legislation, if he chooses to do so, because it violates the separation of powers. I think Trump is going to look at this and realize Congress is trying to usurp the authority of the President of the United States of America. So, getting on back to the world of computers and computing. We talked a little bit about this yesterday, and this is more along the line of confirmation. This is coming from IntelliHub, where the FBI and the NSA and presumably other three-letter agencies are now outsourcing their cyber harassment of targeted individuals and watch-listed individuals to private firms. Think of Blackwater on the internet. And these companies are basically taking over the task of harassing people, hacking their servers, and just basically trying to cause trouble. Now, one of the companies that acts as a hired cyber gun for the federal government, and by the way, because they are a private company, they have no oversight whatsoever. So the company is James Byman and Associates. They're out of Fairfax, Virginia, just a couple of blocks away from the three-letter agencies. And they are paid U.S. tax dollars to go on out and try and stifle online commentary about what the government is doing. It's sort of COINTELPRO brought forward into the 21st century. They're spending your money to keep you in the dark. And I don't think that's a legitimate purpose of tax money. Now, remember John McAfee, founder of McAfee Associates, then he sold it off and he retired. We had him on the show a while back when we started, first of all, finding out about the Obamacare website and what a disaster it was. Apparently, somebody attempted to kill him, and he is in the hospital. His wife is out there saying that John is still breathing. And apparently just before the attack, McAfee asked Internet users to identify a man who appeared to have been stalking him. Apparently McAfee got a picture of this guy, posted it out there, asked people to try and identify him, and that may have triggered the attack. So it's getting to be a very, very dangerous place out there indeed. Now, Canada, which used to be a really nice place, very polite people, very clean, they are really starting to show the true face of dictatorship up there. The Canadian Supreme Court today ruled that Canada has... Oh, we're going to take a break for station identification. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome to our show, hour number 3. And let's see. Okay. Okay. All right. Well, there's an issue with our control room and getting telephone calls. So, okay. Let's get on back here. Hour number 3, and don't bother calling on in because the phone calls are not being put through. There's an issue that they're trying to deal with over there at RBN. So we're talking about computers. We're talking about censorship and dictatorship. And apparently the Canadian Supreme Court today ruled that Canada has the authority to demand Google censor and remove links to certain web pages or online content. Now, certainly that is not new. We've seen a lot of countries who have asked Google to do exactly the same thing within their own borders, like the European Union's right to be forgotten. What matters is that the government of Canada is now saying they can force Google to remove links from searches regardless of where the internet user is. In other words, Canada is demanding the authority to censor the internet outside of its own borders and control what people who are not Canadian citizens can find online. Now, this is, of course, a tremendous problem. It sets a bad precedent. What if every country on earth asserts that same right to Google? You will not have links to this that I do not approve of. Because if you look at the diversity of cultures and beliefs and opinions, you could wind up with Google simply shutting down because they can't list anything. They can't link to anything except retail ventures, and who's going to bother with that? Certainly Israel would want Google to shut down anything critical about the government of Israel, anything sympathetic to the Palestinians anywhere in the world. It's a very, very dangerous precedent that is being set. I think the ultimate issue is going to be enforceability, where other countries are going to say, no, we're not going to go along with this. But if Canada can apply pressure to Google inside Canada, then Google's going to go along with it. You can't get every country on earth to agree on what people should be allowed to see. You could have the United States going to Google and saying that we don't want people in Russia reading what the Russian media says. You already know how Russia Today is under attack by the United States, how Sputnik News is under attack, how they're trying to shut down Al Jazeera. You could have the corporate media of every country demanding Google stop linking to every other corporate media. That's how wildly insane this idea is. This is going to wind up at the United Nations, I'm predicting right now. Another article of concern here is concern over some kind of a false flag that would justify internet censorship. Now, I'm not sure what they're postulating here, but it would have to be something where some information was put out that was very false, everybody got on board it, or it was very damaging, caused a great deal of harm. But we know right now that the corporate media and various governments are desperate to take the free and open internet away from the people, because we have taken away their ability to lie to the public with impunity. And they have gotten by with lies, fraud, and deception for so long, thousands of years, literally. They don't know any other way to govern. They really don't. If you go to my website, up in the top, the gray box just under the banner, there's an article of the liars, by the liars, for the liars, and it is simply examples throughout history of rulers who blatantly lied to their own population to get what they wanted, going all the way back to Ramses the Great in Egypt, who lied about defeating the Hittites at Kadesh. So when you catch the government lying about something, torpedoes in the Gulf of Tonkin, Saddam's nuclear weapons, it's not a shocking event. It's not unique. It's not a scandal. It is business as usual, because that's what government does to control you. And the corporate media in this country is their handmaiden. So let's talk a little bit here about Snopes. There seems to be quite a lot of interest developing about this. Snopes claiming that they are in serious economic trouble. It has put up a GoFundMe page, but it turns out that the story given on out of financial hardship is not entirely accurate. Now, the GoFundMe has worked. They're going to hit their target of $500,000, apparently by the end of the day. But Snopes as a business is not broke. David Mickelson is broke. Snopes' estimated value is in the tens of millions of dollars, with a daily revenue intake in 5 figures a day. But apparently Mickelson himself is involved in a very messy divorce. Apparently prostitutes were involved. And so he's basically getting this money to help deal with that divorce. We're going to do a shout out to our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining our network. And again, don't bother calling on in, because at the moment there's some kind of an issue at RBN where phone calls are not being routed through to the show. So let's not overload those poor people with calls. If the situation should change before the end of the program, I'll let you know, and then you can go ahead and call on in. But right now, just rest that little dialing finger here. Boy, those people over at Ethereum, they got to be feeling very picked on. Apparently, a hacker stole another $8.4 million from Ethereum. This is the 4th hit in a month. I'm starting to think this is being targeted by a rival cryptocurrency that just doesn't want to share the universe with them. Or at the very least, it tells you that Ethereum's wallet system was not robustly tested. I mean, anytime you're going to write anything on a computer that goes out over the network that deals with any kind of money, real, virtual, or anything else, you have to test it. You have to know that it's going to be secure. So let's talk here about vaccines. As you know, over in Italy, there have been major protests in Italy over their mandatory vaccine policy. And so now, of course, the World Health Organization is out there screaming that there's an epidemic of measles breaking out in Italy because of all those people who are refusing their vaccines. And they're basically out there talking about 3,300 cases of measles and 2 deaths, which is basically saying 3,298 children survived the measles. Now, kids get measles. They recover, and afterwards they're immune. And the 2 deaths that resulted, apparently they were medically compromised before they got the measles. And then there is the issue about how time and time again, these outbreaks that are used to advertise the sales of vaccines always seem to be hitting people who got the vaccine. And so we have this other article over here in Natural Blaze that's reinforcing this. States have enacted all these laws requiring college students to obtain the MMR triple vaccine in order to attend their universities. And by the way, in most places, you're no longer allowed to get those 3 shots separately. And if you go back to that documentary, Vaxxed, it is when they are combined, they are most dangerous. Now, college age, you're past that point of vulnerability, because the myelin sheaths on the neurons in the brain are completely fully informed. But here's the problem. The effectiveness of the MMR vaccine is being questioned, because over the last 5 years, we've seen skyrocketing increases of mumps outbreaks across college campuses among the students who get vaccinated. At the very least, the MMR vaccine is not working. At worst, it's causing the disease. And there's a good model of modern American medical practice for you. We're going to give you a shot that actually makes you sick. And when it makes you sick, we're going to use the fact that you're sick to sell this to more people. Now, I got an interesting email from somebody who was responding to our talking about natural supplements, foods that you can eat to help various and sundry things. And this guy's taking a garlic supplement because he does not feel he gets enough garlic in his food. And apparently he had to go to the doctor, and the doctor went down the list of supplements that he was taking. And apparently more than half of the supplements, the doctor didn't even know what they were. Niacinamide, lysine. Lysine's an amino acid. And that he saw that there were garlic supplements. And the doctor said, I do not want you to take these because the FDA does not regulate these, and we do not know what they put in them. Newsflash, they put garlic in the garlic supplements. And, of course, then the doctor went on to recommend statins and prescription blood pressure medication at a very high cost. And here's something to think about. When you get into this argument between the orthodox medical establishment and people who prefer to treat themselves with natural cures, when was the last time you saw a TV commercial for a lawyer that was filing class action lawsuits on behalf of people who got harmed by taking garlic? See all these ambulance chasing commercials. Did you take hydroxychloroquine? You may be entitled to a settlement. Did you take this medication? Did you have this mesh implanted? You're entitled to money. You're never going to see a commercial like that that says, did you take garlic? You're entitled to a cash payment. It's not going to happen. Okay. Now, there's a very tragic story, and unfortunately, it is being dragged out, probably in the hope that it's going to go away. Certainly, the Catholic Church does not want to talk about this, doesn't want us to talk about it. And it goes on back to this horrible tragedy at these homes in Ireland. That was called the Tuam home. And it was a home financed by taxpayer funds. It was run by the Catholic Church. And it was supposed to be a home for unwed mothers. And there was a wonderful movie that was done about this called Philomena, and Dame Judi Dench starred in this as one of the mothers who had been there. And she'd had a son, and the son had been taken away, and she was trying to find where he went. And ultimately she found out that he was basically sold for adoption to a wealthy American couple, and he actually wound up in the government of the United States of America, and then unfortunately passed away from AIDS. And so the whole story is all about them literally having to pry this information out of this home for unwed mothers. And the home for unwed mothers originally told her the child had died. Shortly after being taken from the mother, the child had died. No records, no way to find him. Didn't want to inconvenience the wealthy Americans who'd adopted all these children. Well, along the way, it came to light. The property for the Tuam home was sold, and it was going to be renovated. And they started going in there with a bulldozer over what had once been a septic tank for this facility, and they uncovered human remains of small children, hundreds and hundreds. And so it came on out over time, and the official investigation is still going on, that these Catholic nuns felt it was their duty, first of all, to punish the mothers for sinning, and second, to basically, they worked these girls virtually to death, running a laundry from which the church made more money. And then the children were taken away and given up for adoption. Many of them were beaten and brutalized and killed at the hands of the nuns. And there was even another scandal where the nuns allowed a vaccine manufacturer to come on in and use these children in an unauthorized vaccine study. That's how bad it got. So the new investigation is now out there saying there may have been as many as 14 of these facilities scattered across the Irish countryside. And now they're starting to look into all of these. And I look at this pretty much in the same light as I look at the issue of sexually abusing children. That's not what children are for. And first of all, if a child is born out of wedlock, it's not like it's the child's fault. And yet there is this cultural bias in the Western civilization to view the child that's born out of wedlock as somehow inferior. Now, some of that goes back to property rights because of the way royalty would just impregnate any farm girl or any lady that they could find. And it actually came to this idea that left-handedness was the sign of being born out of wedlock. That, in turn, goes back to a heraldic mark, the specific one, when you're looking at a crest, a coat of arms, there would be a diagonal stripe. And if the diagonal stripe went from the upper left to the lower right, it was supposed to symbolize the strap for a sword. And if you were right-handed, it would go from your right shoulder to your left hip, and the stripe on the crest would follow it. And if you were left-handed, it would go the opposite direction. And that stripe was called a bend. And the bend that indicated you were a legitimate child of that house of nobility was the bend dexter. And the bend that went the other way that said you were not a legitimate heir, but you were still being recognized by your father, was called the bend sinister. And that's where that old myth that left-handedness meant that you were born out of wedlock came from. But again, even back then, and continuing almost to the present day, there is this tendency to look at children who are born out of wedlock as somehow inferior or distrustful. Now, a lot of that went away following the 1960s and the Summer of Love and the Autumn of Gonorrhea and all the love childs that are around. But again, it's not the child's fault. That's why back in the 1990s, when the story about Chelsea Clinton and Webster Hubbell first surfaced, and she was still a little kid, we did a hands-off on it. We're not going to go there. It's not Chelsea's fault what happened. So what these nuns did, really, I'm disgusted by it. They treated these children like the children were somehow automatically evil. And it is definitely horrible. All right, let's skip on through some headlines coming in right now and find some things to talk about here. Normally I expect a certain number of phone calls to come in during the show, and because we haven't been able to get phone calls, I've actually kind of run out of talking points, so I'm going to ramble a little bit here. Story coming on out of Investment Watch blog again. The corporate media continues to push their agenda on Russian collusion. In the face of the reality, there are no facts to back it up. They're still ignoring or trying to downplay the Clinton email scandal. The fact that forensic evidence shows the DNC server was a leak and not a hack. And this really strange story that came out yesterday where the FBI confiscated hard drives from this IT expert who'd been Debbie Wasserman Schultz, IT chief, and was also caught up in that scandal where they were breaking into the computers of members of Congress and spying on them. And apparently, while these drives were in the possession of the Capitol Police, somebody smashed them up with a hammer. The corporate media isn't covering any of that. The attitude of the corporate media is, we're not interested, and so we're not going to let you be interested. We don't see it, we don't hear it, you can't make us, yeah. Which is why the corporate media's ratings continue to decline, and people are coming on over to the independent media to find out what's really going on. So, apparently Sweden has had a massive leak of their government databases. Personal information of millions of its own citizens have now gone online here. And, finally, this is so good. Apparently Adobe is finally going to shut down Flash. and it's long overdue, and we'll talk more about that when we come back. Aloha America, welcome back to our show here, and before we get on back to Flash and more computer stuff, breaking story here right now, and this goes back to how the FBI raided the home of Imran Awan. They confiscated a bunch of hard drives from him, and then apparently while they were in the custody of the Capitol Police, somebody took a hammer to those hard drives and smashed them. Apparently, Awan has just been arrested at the Dulles airport attempting to leave the United States. And you won't see this on the corporate media either. They're all glowing about, oh, we've got more sanctions against Russia. This is a good thing here. But I'll bet you at this point, especially with all the indications that Debbie Wasserman Schultz herself is starting to cooperate with authorities, I'll bet you this Awan flips. And he's going to start singing. So they definitely got him. I mean, he's apparently wanted for bank fraud, among other things. So this is going to get really, really interesting very quickly. When it all starts to come apart, it's going to happen fast. We saw the same thing in the former Soviet Union. Everyone's working to maintain the illusion, maintain the illusion, maintain the illusion. Then there's a crack. And all of a sudden, everybody comes on out and starts pointing fingers. Oh, so it was you who were killed Seth Rich. No, it was going to do that. All right, so getting on back here to Flash. Now, you're probably wondering what all this business about Flash is, and to understand Flash, you need to look at the history. Flash was originally developed back before there was high-speed broadband internet into the home. Back in the days when you had 1200, 2400 baud, ultimately 9600 baud modems on your telephone line, which was very, very slow compared to today. And in order to support more interesting graphics on websites without saturating the bandwidth, Flash was created. And it was basically this language, if you will, that would allow you to send a few instructions over the modem, and then the Flash player would reconstruct the graphic inside your computer where it had the compute speed and the bandwidth to do it. And for the day and age, it was a wonderful little tool. But as broadband became available, it started to become obsolete, and yet they hung on to it, even though it was a major security problem because of something inside Flash called the action script, which is a programming language that was constantly being used by miscreants who would hide malware inside Flash animations. And in the early days of whatreallyhappened.com, we actually got burned by somebody who had set up a legitimate business front. They wanted to run an ad. It was a Flash animation, was planting malware on our readers, which is why we banned Flash from our website. We can't stop other websites from using it, but we do not have Flash on our website other than what we created for ourselves, and I don't even know that there's any of that left. And it was a very powerful tool. When I was working on Lost, I actually used Flash to create a lot of the computer displays, such as the chess program that unlocked the inner sanctum of the hatch. Was all done as Flash animation. And it was really wonderful because you could actually have screen displays on the computer that actually reacted to the keyboard. When the actors were typing, it didn't matter what they typed, the correct stuff would come out. So it was very useful for that. But it was a huge security hole, and it is obsolete. You don't need Flash animation in the days of broadband. And so Adobe has basically said there are going to be no more patches, no more updates, no more support, and hopefully it's going to go away because it is a major, major security problem. According to security researchers, 6 billion records have been hacked so far this year. And they're warning that there is a steady increase in the number of breaches. And this is from Godian, Inga Godian, Executive Vice President for Risk-Based Security. And it is a problem. As our computer technology has advanced, the ability to detect and enforce computer laws has lagged way behind. good for business for the security software company. Bad for us. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And we were talking about earlier about how cable companies are advertising and billing you for bandwidth that's not actually being delivered. We're looking at other ways in which you're being scammed by corporations. And apparently Amazon has drawn criticism because apparently a Charlotte-based startup has been watching Amazon and said that just prior to the annual discount event, Prime Day, all of Amazon prices started going up so that on Prime Day they could drop them and make customers think they were getting a discount and a bargain when in reality they weren't. And by the way, if you look at your local shopping malls on the Christmas shopping season, the same thing. Just before they start ramping the prices up, then they drop them and say, it's a sale, come on in and spend money. This is coming out of Remodies. And it's a small company that was out there, and they're tracking the prices to see what's going on. Now, apparently there is another big stink. This is coming from Walmart. And apparently if you shop at Walmart, you might want to check that receipt, because apparently there is a problem called phantom items that are showing up on the receipts of people for items they don't actually have, but they're paying for them. And apparently it hasn't gotten a lot of attention because who actually checks the receipts? But you need to, because apparently people are getting dinged for $5 here, $10 here on these phantom items. And somebody called Walmart and said, can you fix this? And Walmart said, no, we don't know where it is in the system. Really? How long have you had this problem? 10 years. Think about that one for a while. All righty, getting on back to politics, and I think this Awan getting arrested at Dulles is really going to start kicking things off right now. Conservatives are back to push for congressional investigations into James Comey and Loretta Lynch to reopen the Clinton email case. This is coming from Representatives Matt Gaetz of Florida, Andy Biggs of Arizona, Mike Johnson of Louisiana, and Jim Jordan of Ohio. And they've drafted an amendment that would compel government cooperation with a congressional probe into Lynch's and Comey's activities. And remember, both of them were up to their neck in the HSBC debacle. When HSBC was caught laundering drug money, they were given a wrist slap fine by the then U.S. Attorney for New York, Loretta Lynch. And when they were engaged in this money laundering activity, James Comey sat on the board of directors. When we talk about the narcocracy, this is it. Everybody's tangled up in that CIA flow of drug money coming into this country. And this amendment would compel the production of all documents and evidence regarding Lynch's order to Comey to mislead the American people by stating he should refer to the investigation of the mishandling of classified data as a matter rather than a criminal investigation. So, now over at the White House, apparently Scaramucci has already terminated Michael Short from the White House Communications Office. Apparently, he is one of the people suspected of leaking information out to the media, damaging to the president. It was first reported over there in Politico. And interestingly enough, along with talk about possible firing of Sessions and Mueller, apparently Rex Tillerson, Secretary of State, is talking about resigning his position. And apparently Tillerson is frustrated with his lack of autonomy and public disputes between the White House and Attorney General Jeff Sessions, for other things. Now, first of all, as Secretary of State, he's not supposed to be autonomous. He's supposed to do what the boss tells him to do. But it may be that Tillerson is thinking things are going to get really, really ugly inside Washington, D.C. Maybe it's time to cut and run. We may see a bug out of all these people as it starts to come apart. Now, down in Houston, there's yet another investigation into inappropriate campaign activity. Apparently, at the Houston Independent School District, one of their teachers is now under investigation following a report by a student that the teacher offered students extra credit for attending anti-Donald Trump rallies during last year's presidential campaign. And that is most assuredly something that teachers and schools are not to get involved with. Now, one of the areas in which I disagree with Attorney General Jeff Sessions is his policy on marijuana. And it's not that I use it myself or the fact that I live in a state that produces some of the best Pacololo in the world, but it's safer than tobacco, it's safer than alcohol. The dangers of marijuana are wildly overblown. In fact, if you want to giggle, there was a documentary called Reefer Madness that all of us in high school were required to watch about how you smoke a joint and you'd rape girls and you'd get into trouble and your life would be over. And we look back on it and we realize that it's just pure scaremongering. But it was being done back then as today to protect the profits of big alcohol and big tobacco. Now, down in Uruguay, they're changing their marijuana policy. They're going to legalize it. And they're basically telling the U.S. drug war to get out of their country. And more of those countries in South and Central America are starting to understand that U.S. intervention in the drug war isn't about ending the drugs, but taking out competition to favored cartels. That's also what was going on behind the Fast and Furious program, where the government that doesn't think you should have semi-automatic rifles was spending your tax money to give military weapons to one of the drug cartels in order to eliminate some of the other drug cartels, because competition brings down prices. And remember, profit's what this is all about. It makes money, that makes it good. So Uruguay is telling the U.S. to take their drug policy and to get the heck on out. Now then, there's a new word to add to your lexicon of economic abuse. It's called shrinkflation. And what it is one of the ways that inflation is being hidden is by keeping prices on consumer goods more or less constant, but actually sell you less goods. And one of the ways that's being, one of the classic examples is that toilet paper companies are making the toilet paper fluffier so that they can wind less of it on the rolls. So you used to get 300 sheets per roll, then it was down to 260, now it's down to 240. And apparently over in Great Britain, they're starting to notice that portion sizes are shrinking in food manufacturers and even fast food places. I remember when the first Big Macs came out, they really were big. In fact, there's a website out there from somebody who, for whatever reason we can figure out, spent his entire life working at McDonald's, and he decided he was going to collect the little wrapper bands from the Big Macs. And he's got the full, complete collection showing how year after year after year they got smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller. Over in Great Britain, according to data from the Office of National Statistics, over 2,500 consumer products in Great Britain shrunk in size over the past 5 years, despite being sold for the exact same price. Next time you get a bag of some kind of chips, open it up and see how much chips are in there versus how much air. And I remember there used to be this little statement on the outside of the bag, some settling of contents may have occurred. And there'd be a little gap at the top here. The last bag of chips I got, the chips came up to only 1/3, the bottom third of the bag. That's shrinkflation. Now, if you're planning a vacation down in Mexico, and by the way, there's a lot of really good places down in Mexico, Puerto Vallarta, Las Hadas, but apparently there is a problem there because there's concern that some of these resorts have somehow fallen victim to tainted alcohol. And apparently it all began with this woman who was drinking shots at this Mexican resort, and all of a sudden she passed out while swimming and drowned. And apparently there are nearly a dozen cases where apparently people just consumed alcohol and died. Now, there might be a clue going back and looking at the early days of prohibition. And I'm not talking about where the U.S. government literally was poisoning alcohol to discourage drinking and wound up killing hundreds of thousands of Americans. When you are distilling alcohol, there are two kinds of alcohol that come on out: methyl alcohol and ethyl alcohol. They're colloquially known as wood alcohol and grain alcohol. Grain alcohol is what gets you drunk in booze. Wood alcohol is highly toxic. It can lead to blindness and death. And the problem is, if you do not know what you're doing at a distillery, you can accidentally produce the wrong alcohol. And so there may be a distillery somewhere in Mexico. They've had a staff change, and they're producing methyl alcohol, blending it, inadvertently blending it in with the ethyl alcohol. And that's where this is coming from. Somebody needs to get some of these samples of the booze to a laboratory right now. Now, here is an interesting story. This came out of the Jerusalem Post. Apparently, a former chief of the Mossad has come on out admitting that a Jewish spy network played a vital role in the creation of the Balfour Declaration that in turn paved the way for the establishment of Israel. This is according to former Mossad head Ephraim Halevi. And the Balfour Declaration in 1917 was sent by then British Foreign Secretary Arthur James Balfour to Baron Lionel Walter Rothschild, expressing Britain's support for the establishment of a homeland for the Jewish people in Israel. So the fact that Jewish spies were involved in this suggests that maybe Balfour himself wasn't wholly on board with the creation of Israel. If you remember, there's a scan of Harry Truman's letter recognizing the state of Israel, and he actually strikes out the phrase Jewish state. Because even from its beginning, Israel was supposed to be a country by and for Jews only. And such a thing was inimical to the United States, which has a constitution which says no institution of religion is going to be recognized by the government. So that's where it all began here. Okay, let's see. Okay, questions for the show since the phone lines are not working. I was just wondering, I have a full backup drive via USB, so if ever hit, would be a simple thing to just format other drives and restore via the USB backup. This is in response to an earlier question on ransomware. Does it just encrypt the system drive or all the linked drives? And I replied, it varies based on the ransomware. Some ransomware only encrypt the boot block. And yes, if you've got up-to-date, complete image copies of your disk, you can back up from that. But you run the risk that the ransomware may be there, because a lot of ransomware, when it infects your system, it doesn't go to work immediately because it wants to be copied onto the backups. So you have to be very, very careful about that aspect of it. Let's see, more emails here. Yes, I have noticed it very much at the local markets. We patronize portions are way smaller, but sold for a lot more money than it used to cost. So we're getting caught between the rocks and the hard place. I don't know how families are making it in terms of buying healthy food for their kids with the phenomenal upticks Mike and I have seen with food prices here. Protein and fat and protein, it goes a long way to satiety. And basically, yeah, that's it. The prices are going up for smaller portions, because it makes money, and making money is really good. And the idea of safe and healthy food, there's an ugly reality out there. And that is between Fukushima, Hanford, San Onofre, 3 Mile Island, the Gulf oil disaster, and now the fact that they're literally allowing fracking wastewater to be poured into the Gulf of Mexico. We've toxified most of our food sources, along with the GMO disaster. There literally is not enough safe, healthy, organic food to feed the current human population. And that's why governments are going along with this idea of manufacturing food and filling it full of chemicals and synthetic this and soylent that. And that's really where we're headed. And by the way, if you've never seen the movie Soylent Green, definitely worth catching. Charlton Heston, Edward G. Robinson was his most brilliant performance after he got off the McCarthy blacklist. But yeah, and the theme was even repeated in a more recent film called Cloud Atlas, which is a very intriguing film. You're going to have to watch it 5-6 times before you get what it's really talking about. But yeah, we're in serious, serious trouble. Everybody wants to take a shortcut for the sake of profitability. There's a disturbing lack of global awareness among our political leaders. They'll talk about it. They'll talk about global awareness, global warming, as another part of the sales pitch. But if you look at their actions, they're always short-term, make a quick buck, get more power and authority, control more, grab an intern, head to the showers. They're not thinking the big picture. They're not thinking the long term. And that is a very, very dangerous situation. Okay, apparently more and more of the elites are warning about a coming economic crash. Here's an interesting poll that just came on out, and it shows that we are winning the war for the minds of America here in the independent media, because apparently there was this poll that came on out. Would the United States lie about foreign chemical weapons? 52% of the respondents said yes. The United States government would lie about foreign chemical weapons. And that right there tells you why this nonsense about Assad gassing his own people at Idlib fell flat on its face. We've taken away the government's ability to lie to the population with impunity. And that is something we can point to with pride. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. Last segment of our program today here. And apparently Israel is backing down at the Al-Aqsa Mosque. They've just announced they're going to remove the metal detectors and substitute what they are calling smart cameras. Now, the big issue is, are they going to allow worshipers under the age of 50 back in there? But it does look like Israel has blinked on this issue. And mostly it comes down to the fact that Israel's propaganda that they were somehow justified doing this didn't sell. It didn't work, it didn't carry. All righty, now then, cogent observation, governmentslaves.com. You want to drain the swamp? Start with those lobbyists. Yeah, the lobbyists are completely out of control. And there used to be laws that governed lobbying because of the tremendous influence they would wield on public policy for private interests. The restrictions are off. We're getting word that North Korea is preparing for yet another test of their ICBM. Now remember, the last time they said it was an ICBM, it turned out to be a mid-range missile. But apparently China has deployed troops to patrol its border with North Korea, concerned about an influx of refugees when the United States attacks, which at this point almost seems to be a given. And again, war in North Korea is going to be a prolonged, bloody affair. Look at what happened when the Korean War started. We didn't win that one. Apparently, there is a new lawsuit against Attorney General Jeff Sessions and the Drug Enforcement Agency, claiming that the classification of marijuana as a Schedule I substance is irrational and may even be a violation of the Constitution. We'll see where that one goes. Meanwhile, on the darker side of the drug war, down in Mexico, there were 2,234 murders in June, the deadliest month in the drug war in the last 20 years. And I'm wondering how many of those people were killed with guns provided to the cartels by the United States government's Fast and Furious program. So, moving along here a little bit. Apparently, Donald Trump has put the Boy Scouts of America in a little bit of a hot seat, because the Boy Scouts as an organization avoids political political conflict, and yet President Trump's speech at their national jamboree was all about patriotism and nationalism, and the Scouts were cheering him because certainly nationalism and patriotism are part of the Scouting culture. And apparently some of the parents of the Scouts were a little bit upset because they're on board with this globalism and this the New World Order, and we're not supposed to talk about patriotism anymore. What a mess Soros has made of things. Okay, there is the music. Time for me to get out of here and get something useful done with the rest of the day. We'll be back here tomorrow on the Republic Broadcasting Network. Stay tuned for John Stadtmiller's program. Take what you learn here, share it with everyone that you know. Thanks to the listener who sent me in this video. You didn't include a return address, so I can't write you back. We'll be back tomorrow. Aloha, America.